there's always that challenge of delayed information. It's not ATP, right? You get the results after 24 hours, 36 hours, or even more. So what do you do with a result that comes in 36 hours late? I mean, by that time, your chicken wings already gone and everything's done. So, like, especially when you're looking at things with a short shelf life, what does the test mean? Right? Why are you doing the test if it's from a timing perspective irrelevant for the decision you have to take? So, and that's where that's where the risk perspective can start to put in some actualization of this, to say, hey, this is what we saw yesterday. This is what you usually see happening in your factory. Therefore, this is what the state of your factory is going to be today.
Welcome to the Poultry Podcast Show, brought to you by bioMérieux. I'm Doug Corver, dedicated to bringing you the latest insight and discussion in the poultry industry. Get ready to expand your knowledge and stay ahead with today's episode. If you find this interview interesting, please let us know by visiting our website at bioMérieux.com. Our guest today is Dr. Hannes Pouseele, and he is the Global Solutions Architect for Data and Genomics at bioMérieux, and he's had that position for 6 years. Welcome to the program, Hannes.
It's a pleasure to be here.
You've probably had a little more unconventional path into the poultry industry, so can you talk a little bit about your background?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm coming from a mathematics background, so I did my PhD in algebra and differential geometry, which brought me in a place where we were 6 people in the world caring about the same type of problems, which to me was the moment to shift and start looking for some more useful things to do. So I ended up in a lot of algorithms and software development, and which was a lot of fun. And it got really interesting once the whole whole genome sequencing trend started to come up, which for us was really taking off 2011, 2013. So we did a lot of algorithm development at the time. It was really exciting times. So bit by bit, we got into public health, and we worked a lot with the US CDC to set up their national surveillance system, PulseNet, and transition the whole network from PFGE to whole genome sequencing. So that kind of found an end in 2019, which was the moment where I started looking for a new challenge and decided to cross to the dark side and start working for the industry. Some would argue it's the preventive side because it's solving problems before they hit the consumer instead of afterwards. So ever since, I've been working in the food industry, and gradually more and more into poultry. So most of what I do is in between bioinformatics and data science and software development, which are bringing those 3 skills together. I think really enables us to create tools for the industry that go beyond the obvious.
Is there anything particularly surprising or unexpected that you've learned as you've transitioned into working in the poultry health industry?
What I find very interesting about many food industries and the poultry industry in particular is that they all attract different people. So there's different. I mean, someone in a yogurt factory is not someone in a poultry factory. Those are very, very different people, different problems, and that's really what's fascinated me about the food industry as a whole, and in particular in the poultry industry. I feel there's a lot of leeway and a lot of space to really improve the processes, because it's so intimately linked with the microbiology and the microbiology problem that you're solving there.
At bioMérieux, we go beyond microbiology test results. As a trusted partner with 60 years of expertise, we've developed augmented diagnostics, a revolutionary approach combining core microbiology testing with the latest data and genomic methodologies. We help poultry producers measure and understand salmonella and other pathogens, detecting food safety risks on process and finished products, and leverage data to make better decisions across the whole production chain. Whether it's USDA, FSIS, and other regulation frames, bioMérieux helps you think 360 and optimize your food safety workflow. Go beyond a test result with bioMérieux. bioMérieux.
So let's talk about your approach to data management and solutions at bioMérieux. What sort of data are producers currently collecting from their flocks?
So we have when you think of data at bioMérieux, we have a few fundamental principles. The first one is we are not interested in wild science experiments, but we're really looking at what are people doing today, what is the information that's being collected today, and using that information, can we learn more about the processes or the circumstances that are happening within that industry. So that's really a key driver for us to stick to reality and use that as a starting point to learn and provide insights to the industry. Now the second principle is we always follow the data. That might bring us into places that you don't want to be in, but it's where the data leads you, right? So we don't like to go out and make big promises on we're going to predict the next big salmonella problem on chicken wings. We'd rather say, hey, let's follow the data, see where it takes us, see what it can reliably really produce, and what it can reliably really learn us, instead of making wild promises. So we try to be humble and smart and try to be useful at the end of the day.
Do you have some examples of how that approach has shown an impact in the industry?
Yes, obviously. So and we're working in many domains. So the somewhere, I mean, a little further out from the poultry industry, we have a lot of activities in supply chain. So looking at incoming raw materials, looking at aflatoxin levels in grains, for instance, which is especially for the milk industry is a key driver for contamination in the finished product. So we're working on a big project where we put together data from very different sources. Again, existing data that's already being produced, and try to ask ourselves the question: if you put all that information together, how can we make better decisions on what we're doing? And that helps us in and helps the industry to may have more informed conversations with their suppliers, or make more informed procurement decisions, or set up better sampling plans to make sure that they monitor for the risks they have. So closer to home, we're doing a lot around risk profiling within the factory, and this is really getting more close to where the poultry industry I think can really benefit from data-based tools. So we're looking at environmentals as well as process to say, hey, based on the data that's being collected, how can we create a risk thinking around this? So moving away from a pure, let's say, static hazard thinking, but moving into a dynamic risk thinking to see how does that inform our choices, whether it be strategic choices on sanitation, or whether it be daily choices on routing and what do we do first and what do we do last. All these things can really benefit from having that kind of risk perspective, which is to us really a tool. I mean, you end up having a number, but making that number into something useful and actionable and understandable. I think that's where the real challenge of the data science lies.
Yeah, it sounds like a holistic supply chain approach, and I think what's really attractive for the poultry industry is it's using data that's being collected already.
There's already, I mean, there's so much that's already being done that every time I walk into a factory, it would be a waste to not use that and really squeeze out of that more than just the daily decision, because that's really what, especially when you think about microdata, it's really what data is being used for. You have one point in time that's yes or no, or it's 50 or 100. You decide, you move on, done. Right. So now to me it begs the question: okay, if it was 50 today and it was 40 yesterday, what does that tell me? And that, I think, is where the data science perspective comes in. And it's also, I mean, it helps also in trying to bring microbiology data to a today perspective, because it's always the same problem: tests are never fast enough. The one question we get on our GNAT machine is, yep, 24 hours, great. What about 4 hours? Can we do it faster? So there's always that challenge of delayed information. It's not ATP, right? You get the results after 24 hours, 36 hours, or even more. So what do you do with the result that comes in 36 hours late? I mean, by that time, your chicken wings already gone and everything's done. So, like, especially when you're looking at things with a short shelf life, what does the test mean? Right? Why are you doing the test if it's from a timing perspective irrelevant for the decision you have to take? So, and that's where that's where the risk perspective can start to put in some actualization of this, to say, hey, this is what we saw yesterday. This is what you usually see happening in your factory. Therefore, this is what the state of your factory is going to be today. And that's a way to at least from a trending perspective, to bring the microbiology data into a today decision.
Yeah, that time piece is very important. What is meant by lot independence or flock independence?
Yeah. So that's a good question, because I don't think there is a uniform decision or the uniform definition of what it means. I think we all get the concept, right? The idea of saying, well, if the I make a bunch of chicken wings, then the state of that bunch of chicken wings is that somehow related to the state of the next bunch of chicken wings. So it's microbiologically related, right? So is the microbial load that we see on one lot, if you want, is that somehow related to the next lot? And the fundamental thinking, obviously, is, well, if there's a problem with one thing and the next thing is independent, then we should be fine, right? Because it's then contained in this one piece. But the challenge is, of course, how do you measure that? How do you prove that? There's the obvious sanitation boundaries, but producing 1,000 tons of chicken meat and saying, yep, this is one lot, that is not going to be a comfortable definition, because then you have to hold it and so on. So by the time you get to ship it, it's lost. So there has to be some reason to really consider these two pieces, that first one you made that day and the last one you made that day, are they really microbially dependent? Is the first one going to have some information that tells me about the state of the last one, which is how I look at the problem from the data perspective? Like, what kind of information do I get from one thing if I'm measuring something else? And if there's no relation in between, then there's no evidence to say that those are dependent. I mean, to make it very concrete, look at chicken wing produced after 2 hours at the beginning of the shift, and you have a certain bacterial load that is, I'm just making up a number here, like, is 100. Okay. And now 3 hours later, you take another sample and you say, bacterial load on this thing is 50. Okay. So you can beg the question, why? I mean, what's the difference? I didn't clean in between, but it's different. It's not more. It's not building up, but it's different. So, and to me, that's where lies at least one definition of what lot independence means. Is, are we seeing, and it could be, you could define it in terms of salmonella presence absence. You can define it in terms of EB levels or TVC levels. You can look at many different parameters, but it's really the question of, is this first piece somehow going to tell me something about the next piece? So that to me is what I would say is lot independence.
So are there some practical steps in the short term that people can take to improve their lot management practices and processes?
I think it starts with knowing what happens, right? I mean, the already based on information that you have today, like, people take every day, they randomly take one piece in the morning and one piece in the afternoon, right? Okay, sometimes that's 18 hours apart if it's really extreme. Sometimes it's 2 hours apart, but it's just a not uncommon practice in the industry, let's say. So even that information already even just those samples already start to give you some information because you would obviously expect, like, if they're 2 hours apart, then they should have similar bacterial loads. And so you can set up the whole statistical machinery to say, well, if we look at the difference of these things, are they tighter when the time is shorter, or are they wider? Do you get more difference when the time is longer? Which would, I mean, you could look at what is the level today versus yesterday, which gives you a sanitation break in the middle, which by definition creates independence. So you can set your baseline based on these kinds of parameters to then say, okay, now if you look within one day, if you look at chicken wing in the morning versus chicken wing in the afternoon, what does it tell me? And very often the answer is it doesn't tell you much. There is no, I mean, if you look at those kinds of samples, if you stay at like 3-4 hours out of each other, there is no relationship. And then of course you have to think about statistical power and blah 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 to make sure that you know what you're looking at. But there is no fundamental relationship there. So I think that's on the, I mean, it gives you one way of looking at the quality of your process to say, hey, if my process is working, these things should be independent. We shouldn't have anything spilling over from one thing to another. And of course, if you're next to a chicken that's full of salmonella, then you're gonna get contaminated, right? But if you're 2 hours out, then is it really sloughing off that long off the line? So that's already. I mean, lot independence really is one way to look at the performance of your process. And then you can start looking at different species. You can start looking at different interventions that are in between and say, hey, how does that tell me something about the way I'm producing, the way I'm handling my incoming loads, and the different steps I'm taking in my process to get to a product that is safe to consume. Now it gets a little wilder because, of course, as a former mathematician, I don't like one dimension. I like many dimensions at the same time. So the one of the challenges that we're looking at is, what does it mean if we take all the pieces in the process? Because people don't do just one thing. People have a sequence of steps that eventually get them to a product that is safe to consume. So the process in itself is more than just a chiller or just this one thing that you're doing. It's a series of different steps, and balancing those steps is what gives you a safe product. So I mean, it goes beyond the single point measure and saying, hey, this and this is fine, therefore we're done. It's let's say a little more all encompassing the way that we're starting to think about this. So we one of the active parts of investigation we have in my group is to think about, well, if we look at the process as a whole, like from incoming loads, so receiving, right, up till whatever we have on the finished product, with all the pieces in between, how does that whole machinery work? How does that fit together, and how does all those different steps eventually end up with a super low risk at the end of the thing? Because again, it's a risk equation at that point where you're trying to say, okay, if we have this coming in, then what is really coming out of this?
Right. Yeah. If you're enjoying this episode of the Poultry Podcast Show presented by WiseNetics, please remember to like, subscribe, and share it with your family and friends. You can also set the notifications to on from our channel so you don't miss any other upcoming episodes. And as always, please feel free to leave your comments at any time. Your feedback is valuable to us. Hannes, what is a digital twin?
Now that's where it gets really, really interesting. So imagine that when you just going back to my previous thought there, if you look at your manufacturing plant, then you can build a digital version of that plant. So you can say, okay, we have different steps, like 7, 8, whatever the number is, depending on your specific process, and each of those steps serves a certain function. And sometimes that, I mean, again, we're looking at this digital twin perspective from the microbial load perspective. So some steps will create more or create a risk of more microbial load. I mean, if you start eviscerating, then things are going to get dirty, right? I mean, you'll have these kinds of things, and then you also have different interventions that you're taking. You're washing and so on, so you're reducing microbial load. So that's a whole a whole communicating barrel series of things that you're doing to produce safe food. So putting all of that together into a model that knows what are the relationships between those different pieces, that says, okay, if I get this in here, then this is what it comes out here. It allows you to look at your factory as a whole and start playing around with it. And then you can look at things like, what is really the performance of things? Because the challenge with, biomapping is a great tool to measure each individual intervention, but it still begs the question, so what if I measured this at a day that I got high loads coming in? Like, how do I normalize for my input? Because some houses are going to be dirty, some houses are going to be cleaner. So all of this digital twin basically looks at the true performance of those pieces by marginalizing out the incoming loads. So it shows you it's not about on this day I achieved this performance. No, it says the most likely estimate of how this thing performs, whether it's increasing or decreasing microbial load, is really independent of the output. It's really the performance of those components. So that allows us to start comparing different parts of the process. I mean, you can the obvious air chiller versus water chiller. You can like is a blatant difference of how they intervene very differently in the whole process. But you can start really measuring each of those steps and ask yourselves, okay, I've got two different lines running here, and this line is working like this, and the other one is working differently. Why is it working different? Is it what we want, or are we doing things in a different way and that we didn't even know? So then you can start, and so this is really work in progress, right? But it's I think has a lot of potential for the industry, because once you have that kind of correlation structure of your factory that's captured in your digital twin, you can start thinking about how do certain activities change the behavior. So you can start thinking about, okay, now this factory down the road is doing this and I'm doing something else. Now, what is the difference? And if I were to implement this, so like one obvious element is exposure, right? So the longer you wash something, the cleaner it's going to get. Like that's but is it really, or is it already clean enough? Those are those questions you can start playing around with this digital model, where you say, okay, what if we increase the line speed? What happens? What if we lower the efficiency of a certain intervention? What happens? Is it? The interesting part is there, like if you start playing around with this, then is the increase in or the decrease of efficiency of one thing going to be caught by the efficiency of something else? So, and that's where the holistic perspective really becomes interesting, because it's not about this one step. It's about the whole chain, which gives you the safe food at the end. So really, I think it's a really interesting challenge there. You could even think of taking it upstream and say, okay, now I have a process. I know how my process works because my digital twin. Okay, now what would happen if I knew what was coming in? If you go upstream and you go say, okay, if I know what happens, what lives at the farm today that I know is going to come in, how do I change my process? Would I prefer to make certain things out of this and not other things? Those are really questions that I'm struggling with, as I'm not I don't run a poultry factory, so I have no idea what the kind of flexibility is that people would have. But that would be very interesting to learn. Like, okay, if these are the parameters you can play with, then how does salmonella quantification at the farm, how does that give me an early enough signal to say, I'm gonna you get here at 1 p.m. and the other house gets here at 6 a.m. Like those kinds of decisions you could start thinking about, just to say, okay, well, let's make sure my first run is clean. So those will be really interesting questions to look at. And I think there the digital twin is really helpful to help to tell you, look, this is what you're going, this is the risk you're running at the end of the chain. And maybe that's fine, maybe it's not fine, but that's really then the that's where you can start playing with your production parameters to lower the risk of your outcome. Right?
So bioMérieux has developed the Think 360 approach. So what is that, and how do listeners use those strategies to stay ahead?
Yeah, so we've been talking a lot about the whole end of the chain, so the 395, the 359, sorry. So that's where we put those data tools. But there's obviously a lot of things that are already happening today that make up the whole picture of things. And there's the obvious testing that's already being done. People are screening for TVCs and they are screening for salmonellas. I mean, the quantification of salmonella is really an exciting opportunity to somehow make the signal richer. Because if you look at prevalence versus abundance, those are different metrics. One much more scary than the other one. So then there's as you start building up your knowledge, you can start asking, well, is there some causality that I need to understand? Like, how do I profile my farms? Who's giving me what? So you can start building some intelligence about how, from a static perspective, your system is working. And that's where a lot of the what we call root cause analysis tools come in. If you think of sequencing, of course, this is one of my former babies, so I love talking about sequencing. But it gives you an unprecedented precision into really understanding where something comes from. So way beyond the serotype, you can say, yeah, this bug came from this farm. Okay. So, and that starts to give you a lot of information about origin of things. Where are my problems coming from? Are they recurrent, or is this something? Is it something that's just transient and passes by? What survives my process? So you can start really looking at, are there certain things that are somehow slipping through the cracks of my interventions? Is it always the same things that show up, and so on? So you can obviously start avoiding the overworking the vaccine strains, which are the ones you expect to be there, right? So there's a whole level of precision that these kinds of tools can bring to really not build risk models and probabilistic models, but really build understanding, because these technologies they're very precise. They're amazingly precise. So that's, let's say, another aspect of the whole 360 model, where we have from A to Z, we think about the whole chain, and think about how do all these things fit together to build better understanding and deeper understanding of the process. Of course, always with the improvement of food safety in mind, and helping the industry to improve the food safety outcome.
Yeah, and to learn more about bioMérieux's 360-degree approach to food safety, you can visit the Poultry Solutions page at bioMérieux.com.
It's time for our famous three. One of AB Vista's core strategies is to give customers the flexibility to do more with less, which is a common theme among many companies and producers in today's industry. As a science-driven company, AB Vista has proven results to help our customers achieve optimal performance using customized programs with our core phytase and xylanase.
Hannes, it's been great talking to you. I've got a few closing questions for you. What's your favorite poultry or work-related book or resource that's your go-to?
My favorite work-related resource is my team. That's because somehow some of these folks manage to read papers in Russian about all kinds of fancy machine learning stuff. Now, if I have to name something, I have to name something from my from my distant past, I love my spectral sequences, which is something that stuck with me a long time ago when I was doing my PhD. It's a beautiful mathematics. So those are my key resources within the industry. And I really value the contributions and the learnings I get from those.
Yeah, how about outside of work or agriculture? What's your favorite book or resource?
My favorite resource and the best place to go is the I love reading the books from the Spanish author Zafón. It appeals to my mind because it's full of magic and wonder,
Mhm.
which is what I try to bring in my work, a glimpse of the future and a lot of hard work to get the industry there. So I really like the imagination and the dreaming aspect, but at the same time making those dreams real is what I'm living for.
And one final question. In your opinion, what is necessary for a person to be successful in the animal health field?
From where I stand, I think the right combination of rigor, persistence, and curiosity. So we're dealing with a complex world that's getting more and more complex. That's getting higher and higher demands on the outcome of what we're doing, and we're to get there. I think we need to be curious. We need to question what we think we know, and maybe confirm what we do, or figure out what we don't, and then start thinking about how do we use that. But then that's where the hard work starts, because the idea is 10% of the energy and 10% of the time. 90% is spent in saying, okay, we think we know something. Now, how do we make it really useful? I think that's where the perseverance starts to kick in, and you have to put a lot of energy and power through all of the complexities to really make something that is useful for the industry, which is part of the enjoyment.
Well, Hannes, it's been really interesting talking to you today, and thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
That concludes another episode of the Poultry Podcast Show presented by Wisenetics. Thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to stay updated on future episodes. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review. Your feedback is invaluable to us. You can visit our website at wisenetics.com and learn more about all our podcast segments like poultry, swine, dairy, beef, feed mill, crops, and even pet food. I'm Doug Corver, and I'll see you again next time on the Poultry Podcast Show.